Hi to all who are watching this, I hope you are very well. In this video I would like to talk to you about the importance of translation, so I hope you like. Before beginning, I would like to mention that translation lies only of the writing field, that is in the transfer of text from one language to another language. Since the transfer of the spoken language, the language that we hear that we listen is more closely linked to interpretation. With this in mind, it's necessary to affirm that translation is not based on the simple and net transfer of words, since each language has a particular context that cannot be ignored in the process. So, for greater clarity, I would like to recall one of the stories that caught my attention, and it is the one related to the first controversial translation to the Bible. Clarifying that I say controversial because modifying the word of God in those times in any way was considered blasphemy by religious believers. In those times, early translators tried to circumvent this controversy by transliterating the Bible verbatim in other languages in order to a better understanding of foreign believers while avoiding being a cause of changing the word of God by religious believers. The problem with this is that all the original meaning was lost in the translation, which is why Saint Jerome appeared to prioritize search for sense instead of word-for-word translation. You are it? So, in this moment, from what I mentioned before, is where appears the conception of translation process. We must start from the fact that the translation can be both literal and idiomatic, which depends on the type of text that is sought to be translated. If you have an informative text, you need a very literal translation because you don't have to change the, the message of the text. On the contrary, if you have a expressing a or literary text, you need a very idiomatic translation because in this case you focus in the aesthetic aspects instead of the precision. Obviously, we have the middle point that is somewhat idiomatic or somewhat literal that applies to operative texts. Of course, we must be careful with translators' dilemma. Not to go to strings because a totally word-for-word translation could be unreliable, and a totally free translation represents a loss of faithfulness to the meaning of the source language. Now, do you remember that at the beginning I mentioned the concept of context? So, I'm going to return on it because some translation cannot be done around words, but rather based on the culture of the target language. What I mean, to give an example, we have this Spanish chain here, right? No, when we are translating, we normally uh, do word for word, so the normal thing that is that the result is this. But what happened? The question is that the proverbs that exist in Spanish are not the same that the proverbs is in English. Each language have has its own proverbs, its own idioms. So the idea is that we review for the English equivalent of these proverbs. So in this case, the actual translation it's here. Yes, I know that it seems nonsense because in the same way, if translated into Spanish word for word, will literally be this. But as I mentioned before, the translation process uh, don't only implies word for word, but the meaning and the culture of the target language. So yes, do you see how translation is not a simple process? So the conclusion is that the translation process requires taking into account a lot of things: synonyms, false cognates, pronouns, cultural equivalences, verb terms, grammatical structures, the context of each language. In few words, a lot of things that make it both this process tedious and interesting at the same time. So that's all. Thank you for your attention.